This seminar, I'll be here talking on the embryology, surface anatomy, anatomical relation, endoscopic anatomy, attachments, structure, blood vessel and nerve supply of the esophagus. Finally, I'll be concluding my topic by commenting upon the physiology of the esophagus. So, beginning with the embryology of the esophagus, unlike the rest of the GAT, the esophagus starts to develop between the 4th to 8th week of gestation when the gastrulations occur, in which the part of the yolk sac is incorporated into the developing head. So in this image, we can see the formation of the esophagus. Um, from the foregut, the diverticulum, laryngotracheal diverticulum develops, which is divided by the tracheoesophageal septum. The ventral part, uh, the laryngotracheal diverticulum, uh, goes on to develop the larynx, trachea, and the lungs, and the dorsal part develops as the esophagus, and the embryological anomaly that occurs with this is whenever there is a failure of separation of the tracheoesophageal uh, tracheoesophageal septum, or else there is a shortage in the proliferation of the developing endothelium. There is a chance for the tracheoesophageal fistula, which can be seen in the left bottom slide of this image, in which the ventrally we can see the carina, which is dividing into the left bronchi and right bronchi, and dorsally we can see the fistulous tract that is attached to the esophagus, or else there can be a temporary obliteration or failure to recanalize of the endothelial cells, leading to tracheoesophageal fistula. In the right side of the image, we can see there is failure of the Ryle's tube to prolonged after a distance over the esophagus, and there is no any air shadow that can be seen in the retrocardiac region. Uh, Next, the surface anatomy of the esophagus. The esophagus starts from the level of cricopharynx, approximately at the level of a sixth cervical vertebra. Anteriorly, it can be marked by the lower border of the cricoid cartilage, and the esophagus extends up to the diaphragm opening at the level of 10th thoracic vertebra. Uh, so in the image at the right bottom corner, we can see the thorax, which can be divided into the superior mediastinum and the inferior mediastinum. The superior mediastinum extends up to the level of the sternum manubrae from the T1, T2, T3, T4 thoracic vertebra. Below is the inferior mediastinum, which can be divided into the anterior, uh, middle, and the posterior mediastinum. Esophagus and the structures that are related to it lies in the posterior mediastinum, which will be discussed in the upcoming slides.
Madan, just go back.
Yes, sir.
The surface marking means you have to tell the skin, no?
Sir, as far as esophagus, uh, from where it starts can be located, sir. Rest of the part, it's difficult to start with, sir. The lower border of the cricoid cartilage is the only landmark that can be visible outside, sir. The proximal segment.
So below it's difficult. 10 thoracic vertebra. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Right.
So this image represents in which we can see the lower border of the cricoid cartilage where the esophagus starts, and the esophagus is divided into three segments: the cervical segment, the thoracic segment, and the abdominal esophagus, which will be discussed in the upcoming slides. So as I said, the esophagus is divided into three segments. The cervical esophagus, which starts from the lower border of cricoid cartilage to the thoracic inlet, the jugular notch that corresponds to the T1 level, where anteriorly there is trachea. Posteriorly, we can appreciate the prevertebral layer of the cervical fascia. In the tracheoesophageal groove, we can see the recurrent laryngeal nerve. This image gives a fair idea about the relation that is relating to the cervical esophagus. Anteriorly, we can appreciate trachea, posteriorly, it's the esophagus, in between which we can see the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Little laterally, we can appreciate the lobes of the thyroid gland and common carotid artery that is much more lateral to the thyroid lobules. And the thoracic esophagus. The thoracic esophagus lies in the posterior mediastinum. Again, it can be divided into upper thoracic esophagus, middle and lower. The upper thoracic esophagus is from the level of thoracic inlet to the level of the tracheal bifurcation. And the middle and lower thoracic esophagus is from the level of tracheal bifurcation up to the gastroesophageal junction. The midpoint between the tracheal bifurcation and the gastroesophageal junction can be, the upper segment can be divided into middle thoracic esophagus and the lower segment can be divided into the inferior segment. The upper thoracic esophagus comes in close contact with the left mediastinal pleura, which forms a posterior layer of the esophagus. It is in this image we can appreciate the upper thoracic esophagus. The left, the arch of aorta is indented, as well as the left bronchus is indenting the esophagus. And the posteriorly, we can appreciate the azygous vein, which is originating from the upper abdomen, enters the mediastinum via the aortic opening in the diaphragm. It ascends in the right posterolateral aspect of the esophagus before arching over the right lung to enter the superior vena cava. So surgically, resection of the azygous vein is important to assess the cervical esophagus as well as the upper esophagus at this level. The thoracic duct lies in the right lateral aspect of the descending aorta, not completely attached to the esophagus, but while mobilizing the esophagus, it should be kept that some radicals that is arising from the esophagus can be injured during this process, leading to chylothorax. So in this image, we can see posteriorly the aorta, which is related to the esophagus, as well as the posterior intercostal arteries. In this image, the thoracic duct is not appreciable, which can be seen in the upcoming slides. Finally, the abdominal esophagus, which includes the lower thoracic esophagus with a short intra-abdominal portion of esophagus. And the esophageal opening in the diaphragm is between the left crust of the diaphragmatic muscle fibers. Partly a little sling fibers of the right crust is being pierced. The vagal trunk lies anterior and posterior surface of the esophagus, which emerges from the esophageal plexus from its lower surface. As well as along with the esophagus, the left branches from the left gastric artery, that is the esophageal branches, is being accompanied, and a part of intra-abdominal portion of esophagus, which extends from the diaphragm to the gastroesophageal junction, where it is being attached to the gastrophrenic. It is being attached by the gastrophrenic ligament, and it is related to the left lobe of the liver. The length of the intra-abdominal portion of the esophagus is approximately 1 to 2 centimeter, which varies with individual to individual, another individual. So for the optimum exposure of the cervical esophagus, it should be approached from the left side of the neck. For thoracic esophagus, it should be approached from the right side of the thorax. And the lower esophagus and the gastroesophageal junction should be ideally approached from the abdomen or the left thoraco-abdominal approach. Sir, this concludes the relation to the esophagus, sir.
Okay. Any doubts? Vanita, Ritika?
No, sir.
So when you are doing a transhiatal esophagectomy, okay?
Yes.
Okay, sir.
You are not seeing all these things.
Yes, sir.
No?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So if there is a thoracic duct injury, what happens?
Chylothorax.
Chylothorax. Mm.
Chylothorax, right. Then if there is a azygos vein injury,
Hemothorax.
Hemothorax.
thorax, right. So these are the things you have to be taken care of. That's why you go very close to the esophagus and remove that, not going outside. So you're able to appreciate all the anatomy there now.
Yes,
Mm.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Around the esophagus, there are very, very important structures. Aorta. What is the relationship of IVC? You have that diagram there?
No, sir. This also lies, sir. It comes in the lateral parts, right side and little posterior to the esophagus, sir, along its course.
It's not very close to that. No?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Carry on.
Sir, next it is endoscopic anatomy of the esophagus. The structures of the esophagus is usually appreciated from with certain landmarks that can be seen in the esophagus, which is visible through the video endoscope. The narrowest point of the esophagus lies at the level of cricopharynx, approximately 15 centimeter from the incisor. Further indentation, as discussed earlier, is from the aortic arch at the level of 22 centimeter and from the left main bronchus at 27 centimeter. And it finally pierces the diaphragm at around 38 centimeters from the incisor. So all distance that I mentioned in the earlier slide can vary with the height of the individual. The gastroesophageal junction is defined endoscopically as the upper margin of the proximal gastric fold, as well as the change in the texture can be appreciated in the gastroesophageal junction. Proximally, we can, in this image, proximally, we can see the pale mucosa and the distally the salmon colored mucosa, which is the columnar cells. This is a good landmark to identify the gastroesophageal junction, along with the rugosity that is created by the stomach to see the GE junction endoscopically. In certain condition such as Barrett's esophagia, where there is a metaplasia, we can appreciate the columnar epithelium, the change in the color, which can be appreciated in the right bottom corner of the image, in which there is a proximal extension of this columnar epithelium. Next, it is attachments to the esophagus. The esophagus is attached to the surrounding structure by the loose areolar tissue. Within this loose areolar tissue lies the slips of smooth muscle, which helps to attach the esophagus to the surrounding structures such as trachea, bronchus, pericardium, and aorta. So whenever there is a movement that occurs during deglutination or else the respiration, it allows a sizable movement. It allows a good mobilization of the esophagus so that there is no any trauma that occurs to it, as well as the phrenicoesophageal ligament. Sir, in this image, it can be appreciated, sir. It is formed by the condensation of the endothoracic fascia as well as endo-abdominal fascia. So it is usually weak anteriorly as well as laterally, but this ligament is very important when it comes to the pathology of the hiatus hernia. The phrenicoesophageal membrane is very important because it serves to keep the GE junction in its position while deglutination, while swallowing, when there is a deep inspiration, which allows the GE junction to come little upwards. So once this action is completed, again, with the help of the phrenicoesophageal membrane ligament, the position of the gastroesophageal junction is maintained. So whenever there is any pathology that is associated with the phrenicoesophageal ligament, it leads to the rise in the esophagus, leading to hiatus hernia. And the ligament also maintains the angle between the distal esophagus and the proximal stomach, that is called as the angle of His. Sir, I like to stop here, sir. Anything to be discussed? Sir?
You are telling phrenicoesophageal. It's not phrenico, it is
Clinical.
phrenoloesophageal ligament. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Vanita is asking importance of physiological constrictions. You mentioned, no?
Yes, sir.
What is the importance of that? Go back to that slide. Yeah, before that.
Yes. Sir.
15, 27, 22, 27, 38.
Sir, while placing Ryle's tube or ANJ tube, with this we can it helps us to locate the location which part of the GAT we are in, sir.
While doing endoscopy,
Endoscopy.
no?
Yes, sir.
Indentation at 22, that means aortic arch. 27.
Biopsies as such has to be avoided in this area, sir, to prevent the complication if at all there is any growth or anything.
Right. Anything else, Vanita? Vanita? Any other point you want to tell? Unmute. It's not there.
Madam is not there, sir.
Okay. Carry on.
So next is structures within the esophagus. The upper esophageal sphincter, which is a high pressure zone that is located between the pharynx and the proximal esophagus. It is usually in a tonic contractile state, which relaxes only during the swallowing. The contraction is because to prevent the aerophagia during respiration. The horizontal fibers from the cricopharyngeal muscle passes posteriorly from the cricoid cartilage to join the inferior constrictor muscle, which can be appreciated in this image, where the fibers from travels horizontally to join with the inferior constrictor muscle. While doing it in the proximal segment, there is a potential space in which there can be a diverticulum whenever there is a improper muscular contraction between the cricopharyngeal and the inferior constrictor, leading to this is the weakening in this area is called as Killian Dyson's. Just like Killian Dyson's, certain other weak spots that is located around this region are Killian Jamison area as well as Limer Dyson's, that which is distal to the cricopharyngeal muscle. So next it is the body of esophagus. Histologically, the body of esophagus is made
So,
up
Madan, just go back.
Yes,
You
sir.
know about the Zenker's diverticulum?
Zenker's, yes, sir.
Hmm?
Yes, sir.
Where does it come?
Between the inferior constrictor and the cricopharyngeal muscle, sir.
That's the area, is it?
Killian's Dyson, sir.
There, Zenker's
sir.
diverticulum.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Zenker. Yes, sir.
But this is posterior, no? What you are showing?
Yes, sir. But it, yes, sir. But as for literature and clinically, we see there will be a swelling in the left side of the neck, sir.
Lateral, no?
Yes, sir. Left side lateral, sir. I didn't get the image correctly, exactly depicting the defect, sir.
Anyway, check it up, okay? And then post it.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So, next comes the body of esophagus. Histologically, it is made up of the full layers, adventitia, from the outside to inside, adventitia, muscle layer, submucosa, and mucosa. In mediastinum, the esophagus does not have any serosal covering. There is a dense connective tissue of the adventitia, which forms its outer layer. The muscle layer is composed of the outer longitudinal and the inner circular layer. Proximally, the longitudinal originate from the dorsal aspect of the cricoid cartilage as well as the cricopharyngeal tendon to descend in a spiral fashion, which as shown in this image. So in this image, we can appreciate this is just to represent the spiral nature of the longitudinal muscle. The left side of the image shows a nutcracker esophagus or diffuse esophageal spasm. In the right side, we can appreciate the achalasia cardia, in which there is a prominent constriction in the lower esophageal junction, which will be discussed in the next slides. Basically, this slide is put up to know the spiral nature that can be appreciated by the inconsistent contraction of the longitudinal muscle, which can be appreciated in the left side as well as right side of the image. So inferiorly, this longitudinal muscle splits up just above the esophageal junction, creating a potential weakness in the left posterolateral aspect of the esophagus, which is the most common site for tear in the spontaneous rupture of the esophagus, which is called as Burav syndrome. The circular muscle layer is continuously proximal with the inferior constrictor, and the muscle fibers are arranged in the elliptical nature. This fashion of alignment helps to propel the food from proximal direction to the distal direction in the esophagus. And proximal 4 to 6 centimeter of both the esophageal musculature, both the longitudinal and the circular muscle is striated. There is a mixture of striated and smooth muscle that can be seen little distally for around 10 to 13 centimeter length. The lower half of the esophagus is purely smooth muscle. The submucosal layer consists of a elastin fibers within the loose connective tissue and allows a good distension of the esophagus during swallowing. The absence of the serosal layer makes the esophageal anastomosis technically little difficult. And because there is absence of serosal layer, there is a good abundant lymphatic channel, blood vessel, and submucosal nerve plexus, which is located within the submucosal layer. The importance is sir, I'll explain that in little upcoming slides. In esophageal mucosa is made up of the non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium within the basement membrane, separating it from the lamina propria and muscularis mucosa. There is a close change at the gastroesophageal junction to the columnar lined gastric epithelium at the squamo-columnar junction. So Barrett's esophagus, as mentioned earlier, is a metaplasia of the lower esophagus, which occurs in response to the chronic acid and bile reflux, characterized histologically by the intestinal metaplasia and the presence of goblet cell. So this image, the cross section of esophagus, we can appreciate the layers of the esophagus as well as the nerve plexus. From inside to outside, it's the submucosa, followed by we can appreciate the lamina muscularis mucosa and lamina propria, and the submucosal layer, the muscular layer, and the adventitia layer. So, sir, here any questions, sir?
Just go back to what you said, the layers, no?
Yes,
different
sir.
layers.
Yes, sir.
That's how it is different from the rest of the bowel, that there is no serosal layer. Instead of that, there is only adventitia there.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And yes, sir. It also makes whenever, since the serosal layer is absent, if there is a esophageal carcinoma, it can easily spread to the surrounding tissue, sir. That is one disadvantage of it, sir.
Yeah. Also, during anastomosis, you have to be much more careful because there is no serosa. You have to include all the muscle and also the submucosa and mucosa. Dr. Girish is there. I think he can highlight on this. Girish?
Sir.
Esophageal anastomosis, you take much more precautions than the rest of the intestinal.
So, true, sir. As you mentioned, there is no serosa, so meticulous handling of tissues before immobilize, after immobilize, during the anastomosis is required. Easily tears, preferable to use staples. If you are doing hands-on, preferable to do interrupted anastomosis in single layer. And one more thing, the chances of rupture also are high in these esophagus due to absence of serosa. Any like what the syndrome, two syndromes, I'm not getting the Bahara I think.
Or obviously.
Bahara and yeah, they get ruptured easily because of this absence of this serosal.
Okay. Anything else, Ritika? Doubts?
No, sir.
Carry on.
So next it is the blood supply of the esophagus. Esophagus receives segmental blood supply along the length. In the neck and the superior mediastinum, the inferior thyroid artery is a predominant artery which supplies the esophagus, which is a branch from the subclavian artery. In the posterior mediastinum, the esophagus receives the direct aortic branches. The short vessel that um, the short vessel which supplies nutrition to the esophagus through the short vessels should be carefully handled during the surgeries to prevent the avulsion from the aorta. And there is anastomosis with the bronchial artery, which enters the esophagus at the level of tracheal bifurcation. The lower esophagus, in the lower esophagus, the predominant supplies from the ascending branches, that is from the left gastric artery. So in this image, we can see the blood vessels of the esophagus. Superiorly at the cervical region, we can appreciate the inferior thyroid arteries. The thoracic segment, there is a branches that is directly arising from the aorta. Inferiorly, the branch from the left gastric artery supplying the lower esophagus can be appreciated. So next it is the venous drainage. Both the arterial and the venous drainage supply to the esophagus is variable. Most of the venous anastomosis and the plexus lies within the submucosal layer. From the upper esophagus, it drains into the inferior thyroid vein and into the brachiocephalic trunk. In the mediastinum, it is via the azygos and the hemiazygous system that ultimately drains into the superior vena cava. In the lower esophagus, it is via the tributaries from the left gastric vein, which empties into the portal vein, creating a portosystemic anastomosis in the lower esophagus. In portal venous hypertension, the rise pressure is transmitted to the submucosal plexus of the lower esophagus, which creates a fragile varicosities. The esophageal varices are important clinically as it's one of the major cause for the upper gastrointestinal hemorrhage. Since there is a direct communication with both the systemic and the portal system, which is a important route for the metastatic dissemination of the esophageal carcinoma. Is there anything on the blood vessels of the esophagus?
It's very important. If you have understood, I think those two slides are very, very important. Arterial and also the venous. Anyway, again, you'll be coming to the lymphatics also.
Yes,
Where all you get portosystemic anastomosis other than lower end of the esophagus? G junction is one. Where else?
The superior rectal artery and the middle rectal artery at the
okay, rectum.
Yes, sir. And sir, the periumbilical area where we can appreciate the portosystemic anastomosis, sir.
Okay. 3. That's called, sometimes if there is very much enlarged vein, what is it called as?
Spider? No, sir.
Caput medusae.
Caput medusae, sir.
Where else? Vanita? Nitika? Where else you get? Pardon? Bare area of the liver.
Liver.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Correct, no? Where else? If you have done any surgery and done anastomosis, okay?
Yes, sir.
There also it can develop.
Sir. Sir,
Okay.
the retroperitoneal also it's seen, sir, but I'm not sure the location of it, sir. Between
Right.
the colonic and the upper back area, it is seen, sir, but location I'm not sure, sir.
Right. Check it up.
Okay. Sir, I'll post it. Yes, sir. I'll post it in the group.
Yeah. Okay. Carry on.
So next, going on to the lymphatics of the esophagus, which is located within the mucosal layer of the GIT. The submucosal lymphatics forms a complex interconnecting network that extends along the esophagus. Some of these channels pierce the muscular layer of the esophagus to drain into the paraesophageal plexus. From there, it drains into the paraesophageal nodes, which lies along the esophageal wall, draining into the periesophageal nodules and more distant esophageal nodes as well. The thoracic duct, although which is in direct communication with the esophageal plexus, and the duct may itself, some of them can directly from the esophagus can drain into the thoracic duct. This arrangement allows for early and widespread lymphatic dissemination in esophageal carcinoma once the basement membrane has been breached. So this lower image in this slide um, gives a fair idea about where where the lymphatic drain. In upper esophagus, it mainly drains into the cephalic direction in the cervical nodes. The middle esophagus, it drains into the paraesophageal, para-aortic, and tracheobronchial areas. The lower esophagus, it drains in both the mediastinal as well as the upper abdominal nodes, the pericardiac as well as the left gastric, along the left gastric artery, the nodes that are located. So going on to the nerve supply of the esophagus.
1 minute, wait.
Yes, sir.
Now, Girish may throw some more light on the. See,
Yes,
these
sir.
are all-
As he has mentioned, true, the lymphatics are very extensive, particularly in this organ.
Mhm.
They are submucosal mainly. The importance of this is such that a malignancy which is in the lower or in the upper aspect can extend to beyond its thoracic section. Imagine he has got a GE junction tumor. There may be a metastatic lymph node even in the neck, which may be a regional node, which is considered as a regional node. And the same way, lesions in the proximal esophagus might have metastatic lymph node in the abdomen along this left gastric artery or in the celiac axis, though the chances are less than 20%. They may be skip meds or they may be in continuity with the nodes along the trachea, paraesophageal, as mentioned, or the diaphragmatic nodes. So hence the importance of appropriate lymph node dissection has to be taken care in these things. So you should know about skip meds, or it may be contiguous meds from one area to the other. So the regional lymph nodes include both the neck nodes and the abdomen nodes, apart from the ones which are there in the mediastinum and the paraesophageal region.
Very true. Also, there is extensive submucosal plexus, venous,
Yes.
arterial, and lymphatic.
Yeah.
So spread along the longitudinal is also much more common. No?
Yes, hence the anatomic basis of doing total
Total.
esophagus in case of squamous cell carcinomas, and probably in case of a Seward's one type adenocarcinomas. Though the lesion is there, probably in somewhere at the lower end, the whole esophagus has to be addressed due to because of this reason.
Right. Okay. Anything else?
Sir, I have a doubt, sir.
Ask all the doubts.
Is the lymphatic channels visible during surgery, sir, on table? Since it's very extensive.
You mean you are talking
Channel.
about submucosal or which one, man?
Sir, that as I said earlier, from esophagus to the para-aortic channels, the channels that I mentioned, is it visible or
No, the present technology does not allow us to see that, but you can see the thoracic duct.
thoracic? Okay, sir.
Thoracic duct is usually not the one which drains esophagus. So it's all the paraesophageal nodes, and then they go along the chain to the respective lymph nodes directly. Usually they don't drain to the thoracic duct. You can definitely see the thoracic duct. Usually it is not to be seen unless you are planning for an oblique excision. In case of contiguous involvement, you usually don't want to see that at the course along the esophagus or at the crossing at the level of T4 or beyond that. So otherwise, other than that, no other lymphatics will be visible with the present technology.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Lymphatics, there is no need to see also, Madan. What you have to clear is the lymph nodes.
Okay, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir. Since the damage causing chylothorax, that's why I asked, sir.
That is for the thoracic duct.
Okay, okay, sir.
That has to be protected, and if necessary, C nodes. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Girish, there are we can inject the dye or something before surgery or you can use the fluorescent technology or something to see the thoracic duct or
Yes,
protect
sir.
it or
Yes,
lymphatic.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can see. Usually, we don't do that, but the present indocyanine green can be used to see the thoracic duct intraoperatively. Other than that, we don't give any other. What do you say? Unless we are operating for a second time where we have a chylothorax, we don't give any other substance like giving high fatty meal or methylene blue to see the lymphatics.
Hmm.
So
Right.
it's usually recently they've started using the indocyanine green to see that. But as I mentioned earlier, if at all there is no contiguous involvement and if you are not planning oblong excision, you need not go into the plane of thoracic duct between the esophagus and the aorta.
Right. Okay, continue, Madan.
Next, it is a nerve supply of the esophagus, which will be further discussed in the physiology of esophagus. In this slide, I will be mentioning the anatomic, histologically, how the nerve supply of the esophagus that can be appreciated. Esophagus is compromised by the extrinsic parasympathetic as well as the sympathetic supply, as well as the intrinsic intramural plexus. This nerve supply is controlled by a complex swallowing center that is located in the brainstem, which coordinates, interprets the signal that is arising from the esophagus through the local receptors from the pharynx as well as the esophagus. The parasympathetic supply provides the predominant motor and sensory innervation to the esophagus. It originates from the vagal motor nuclei and it is distributed through the vagus, through the distributed to the esophagus through the vagus nerve to form an esophageal plexus surrounding it. In the upper cervical esophagus, it is mainly through the glossopharyngeal as well as the recurrent laryngeal branch of the vagus nerve through which the esophagus is innervated. So the sympathetic supply, when compared to the parasympathetic, plays a minor role in the esophageal function. The preganglionic fibers of the sympathetic originates from the fifth, sixth thoracic spinal cord segment and passes the postganglionic fibers terminates at the meandric plexus along the esophageal wall. In this image, we can appreciate the location of the Auerbach or the meandric plexus, which is located between the circular as well as the longitudinal muscle layer. Submucosal layer, the plexus, that is the Meissner's plexus between the circular layer and the submucosa, can't be appreciated in this image. The intramural plexus, that is the meandric plexus, lies between the circular and the longitudinal muscle layer and becomes more prominent in the smooth muscle portion of the esophagus, which is the distal end of the esophagus. Denervation of this meandric plexus in the region of the lower esophageal sphincter leads to the condition Achilles cardia. The submucosal Meissner plexus is more space containing nerve fibers, but there is no any ganglia. So next is a physiology of the esophagus, sir. In this, how the nerve supply control of the esophagus will be discussed, sir. Shall I proceed, sir?
Yeah.
Sir. So in the fasting state, usually the esophageal body is relaxed with the continuous contraction of the upper and the lower esophageal sphincter. The intraluminal pressure is equal to the atmospheric pressure in the upper cervical esophagus. Distally, it becomes more negative and it is equal to the intrapleural pressure. The esophageal smooth muscle does not normally exhibit spontaneous phasic wave activity, which can be well appreciated in the small intestine as well as the large intestine. In esophagus, because of the absence of this phasic slow wave activity, it is mainly dependent on the extrinsic and the intrinsic nerve supply that I mentioned in the earlier slide. So usually when a person is fasting, he swallows averagely 70 times per hour when he is awake and 7 times during his sleep. When he is eating, roughly around 200 times per hour he swallows. Swallowing is a complex reflex involving many muscle, which is this reflex is shared with other activities such as retching, vomiting, belching, and speech. The hyoid muscles are active throughout this reflex, elevating the hyoid bone drawing it forward and then descending it in an elliptical pathway during the swallowing, which is simply means the complex activity that occurs with each swallowing. So the swallowing can be divided into two phases. One is the oropharyngeal phase, which is a voluntary phase, and the esophageal phase, which is an involuntary phase. So in oropharyngeal phase, which is further divided into the oral stage and the pharyngeal stage. The oral stage is the presence of the chewing activity and the mixture of the food, which is being uh, broken down into small pieces, and next followed by the pharyngeal stage, in which the broken down food is passed on to the pharynx. In this phase, we can see the elevation of the hyoid bone, which allows the glottis to cover the pharynx, thereby preventing the aspiration. The effective barrier of the aspiration is actually provided by the adduction of the true vocal cords. And in this oropharyngeal phase, we can see the relaxation of the upper esophageal sphincter, which occurs mainly for allowing the food bolus that is coming from the pharynx to go into the esophagus. And there is also, this occurs just before the onset of the pharyngeal peristalsis. The upper esophageal sphincter, which is the high pressure zone that is situated between the pharynx and the upper esophagus. The resting sphincter pressure prevents the aerophagia and aspiration of the refluxed gastric content. This continuous activity of the contraction is mainly because of the continuous myogenic activity of the cricopharynx, as well as the inferior constrictor muscle, along with the inherent property of the tissue of the upper esophageal sphincter. Vagus mediated increase in the upper esophageal sphincter pressure occurs secondary to the esophageal distension or acid exposure that occurs in the proximal esophagus. This sphincter tone is usually decreased in sleep and general anesthesia. So when the swallowing initiated pressure drop occurs prior to the bolus, that is food bolus that is entering the pharynx, which compromises both the sphincter muscle relaxation due to the neural inhibition as well as the sphincter opening secondary to the forward displacement of the hyoid bone. Once the bolus has passed into the esophagus, the upper esophageal sphincter exhibit rebound hypertension as soon as the food bolus passes into the esophagus, to coincide with the initiation of the esophageal peristalsis, as well as it prevents the reflux back into the pharynx as well. Yes, sir. Next it is the esophageal phase. Esophageal phase occurs due to the coordinated muscle contraction, which propels the food bolus from proximal to distal direction. Usually, the food bolus from the proximal to distal esophagus is transmitted within 8 to 10 seconds, which occurs due to the combination of the intrinsic and extrinsic neural factors. The myogenic property of the striated and the smooth esophageal muscle produce this organized waves of contraction. Sir, any questions still here, sir?
This much detailed physiology is not required. What is you have to concentrate is on applied physiology.
Yes, sir.
Surgical. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Any questions in the chat box? Nothing. Right. You have put the applied physiology?
Yes, sir. It's coming in the upcoming slide, sir. By the esophageal peristalsis itself, there is a 3 peristalsis. There is a primary, secondary,
no,
and tertiary.
That's enough.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So,
all right. Carry on.
Primary peristalsis is basically important for the passage of food bolus. The secondary peristalsis usually is triggered by the esophageal direct distension by the residual bolus. Actually, it is ineffective when compared to the primary peristalsis. The tertiary contraction, in which it is defined as a localized non-propagating contraction of esophageal body. Next, it is investigation of the peristalsis. It is usually done by the manometric technique, as well as the video fluoroscopy, to see the movement of the esophagus once the food bolus is how it travels. The primary peristaltic wave travels fast in the mid esophagus, and the slowest is just appreciated just above the lower esophageal sphincter. The average velocity is roughly 4 centimeter per second. The muscular contraction with each contraction lasts for 2 to 7 seconds, which is more prolonged in the distal esophagus. The mean peak amplitude of contraction is between 35 to 70 mmHg. In this, this is a manometric recorded sphincter pressure, which can be appreciated in each part of the esophagus, in which the upper esophageal sphincter we can appreciate the high level of the sphincter pressure between 50 to 100. In proximal esophagus between 55, and again when compared to the upper esophageal sphincter, lower esophageal sphincter tone is little less. So if at all, whenever there is a less pressure below 30 mmHg, which is appreciated in the lower esophageal sphincter area, there is a retrograde escape of the liquid bolus, or there is an incomplete esophageal clearance. In another way, whenever there is a pressure is more than 200 mmHg, in the distal half of the esophagus, it's called hypertensive. That is clinically called as nutcracker esophagus, in which the patient experiences a chest pain or dysphagia whenever he consumes food. And the secondary peristalsis is stimulated by the esophageal distension and can be reproduced by the balloon occlusion in the lumen through the manometric method. So next comes the control of peristalsis, which is mainly due to the integrated action from the central and the peripheral neural mechanism. The swallow induces a primary peristalsis, which is controlled by the swallowing center, as well as locally the vagal pathway. Clinically, which can be abolished when there is a bilateral cervical vagotomy. The propagation of the peristalsis in the smooth muscle segment involves two peripheral vagal pathway. That is, the cholinergic mediates the excitation of both longitudinal and circular muscle, smooth muscle, and the non-adrenergic, non-cholinergic inhibition of the circular muscle. So next, the slide on the lower esophageal sphincter. It is a 2 to 4 centimeter zone of high pressure in the GE junction. The resting pressure is roughly between 10 to 25 mmHg. Sphincter has both intra-abdominal as the intrathoracic component. During respiration, there is a change in the pressure that can be appreciated in the lower esophageal sphincter, and as well as because of the contraction of the crural diaphragm. And the three major factors controlling the lower esophageal pressure are the myogenic property by the muscle itself. Next, it is the inhibitory and the excitatory neural influence. So the intrinsic muscular myogenic property within the muscle fibers causes the continuous electric spikes activity, which stimulated by the calcium influx and maintains a continuous depolarized state at rest also, which prevents the gastroesophageal reflex activity. The neural activity can modulate the sphincter's pressure. Myenteric plexus here is innervated by both vagal preganglionic and sympathetic postganglionic fibers. The nitric oxide is a primary inhibitory and acetyl factor, and acetylcholine is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter that is seen in the lower esophageal sphincter. Failure of the lower esophageal sphincter to relax causes achalasia, as mentioned earlier. Sir, this is an important slide, sir. This explains the factors, hormonal factor, food factors, which causes to increase or decrease in the lower esophageal sphincter pressure, sir. Such as food activities, clinically, consumption of lot of fats, chocolates, caffeine, alcohol, cigarette smoking decreases the sphincter pressure, so that predisposing to acidity. Next, gastritis. Next, certain high protein diet as well as consumption of spicy food increases the lower esophageal sphincter pressure. So finally, a slide on the transient lower esophageal sphincter relaxation. So which explains the role for gastroesophageal reflux disease. The transient lower esophageal sphincter is this relaxation is unrelated to the swallowing, and it is usually facilitated by the pharyngeal stimulation and the gastric distension, allowing the fatty meals following a fatty meal or in upright posture. Drop in the sphincter pressure that occurs more slowly than the swallowed related relaxation, and it is prolonged typically, which lasts for 10 to 60 seconds until the next swallow intervenes. This concept is recently being studied extensively for its pathology that is associated with gastroesophageal reflux disease. Sir, with this I conclude, sir, the physiology.
Right, right. You can stop sharing.
Yeah, sir.
Which is the test you have to do to assess the motility disorder?
Manometric test, sir. The place the receptors, just like the RT tube, sir, which has 4 to 5 receptor as at the anatomical landmarks that I mentioned earlier, sir. So
Right. One is the esophageal manometry, correct?
yes,
Anything else?
Video fluoroscopy, sir. They give a video fluoroscopy, sir. They see the propagation of the food bolus from the proximal to distal segment.
Right.
Barium yield is given.
Barium swallow
has been given and
video fluoroscopic examination. Correct. Right. Anything else? Farooq, Namita. Stop sharing this, no?
Yes, sir.
Girish, anything else to suggest for him? You made a good presentation, man. Have you understood? Have you understood all the things?
Yes, sir. To some extent.
Right, right. No, if you prepare like that, it will be very good for your exams. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Keep all this in a folder, all whatever you have prepared for the, so that before exams and all, you can just go through that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Farooq, anything? Suggestion? Namita?
Sir, I have a doubt, sir. Sir, the hiatus hernia, as mentioned earlier, sir, it is mainly because of the phrenoesophageal ligament abnormality, sir, in which
that is one of the factors.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So, what are the other things?
Anatomically, is it repaired, sir, during hiatus hernia surgery?
No. Anatomically, because it will be destroyed when there is esophageal GERD and also hiatus hernia, that becomes weak.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So other things which are important. One is intra-abdominal esophagus.
Yes, sir.
Prevent GERD. Okay. At least 5 centimeters should be there. Then restore the angle G junction.
Yes, sir.
Angle of His, you have to restore it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And prevent the mobility of the abdominal esophagus towards the thorax.
Okay, sir.
All these have to be corrected when you are doing a surgery for the hiatus hernia and narrowing of the crus hiatus. Yeah.
Yes.
It's not one factor, multiple factors. Okay. What are the doubts? Because you have studied more, you'll have all the doubts. Anything else?
No, sir. I will ask in the coming things. Surgery, Manita madam is presenting, sir. That time, surgery-based questions, sir.
Okay. Sorry, they forgot to post it in the group earlier. Next time onwards, you do it, no? Madan?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll post, sir.
Okay. Anything else, Girish, Farooq?
Yes, sir. Applied, I wanted to tell regarding this arterial anatomy.
Right.
Before you take a decision on mobilization of the esophagus with respect to cancers in the GE junction or in the distal esophagus, you should be damn sure about of what you are excising, whether you are addressing the whole of the esophagus, and if you are addressing so, there should be no disease within the abdomen. So we mobilize the esophagus completely, the arterial anatomy is completely taken off, there will be no blood supply, and if at all you find a disease in the abdomen which is metastatic, then you are in a catch-22 situation. You have to do an unnecessary esophagectomy and a pouch of whatever you decide on to. So your pre-operative decision based on what you have to exercise, why you have to exercise, and what would be the initial approach to your disease is very important before you mobilize the esophagus.
Very true. Very true. Okay. Now you understood, Madan, what is the basis of total esophagectomy?
Yes, sir.
No?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good night, sir.
Amita, how are you? Amita? No. Okay. Right. Thank you. Good night.
Good night,
Thank
sir.
you, sir. Thank you, sir.